As Joe said, I'm the president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the United States. We were chartered by America's Congress in 1949 to save important places and to encourage preservation as a means for advancing vibrant and sustainable communities across the United States. And I'm really honored to be here with all of you today. Like many Americans, I have followed with great interest the history of dairy, and especially the recent history of dairy. We were inspired by your peace mural when it traveled to Washington, D.C. Several years ago, and when Helen called to invite me to be part of this conference, I knew right away that I wanted to do whatever I could to be here with you and to, in some small way, contribute to the great undertaking that you have underway in rebuilding your city. So before I begin, let me thank our sponsors today, and particularly the Inner City Trust, for the invitation to be here with you. I'm very excited, and my husband Rob is here with us this morning. We're both visiting Derry for the first time, the island of Ireland for the first time, and we've really been using this past week to soak up as much of your history and local sites as possible. So you might say that I'm not just a speaker at the conference today, I'm actually the subject of your conference, a heritage and destination traveler. So today I want to talk with you about the tremendous opportunities that you have here in Derry to harness the amazing potential of historic buildings and to really unlock them and use preservation as a means to grow your economy and your community. I know that in many ways I'm preaching to the choir this morning, but unlike in America where there's so much focus on the bright and shiny and new, I know that you have a great appreciation in the UK and here in Northern Ireland for your history, your rich history, and that appreciation is well known. But for those of you who don't live and breathe historic preservation every day, my hope is that you'll leave this conference never looking at the walls of Derry or your historic buildings here or really anywhere else in the same way. Because these structures are not just pretty edifices, they really can be economic engines, the bedrock of community resilience. They can help solve some of today's community problems and create a foundation for further prosperity and sustainability. As I sometimes say, if I told you that I knew that there was one simple thing that you could do to sleep better at night, to lose weight, and to save more money, I bet I would have your attention. And I don't know the answer to that particular set of challenges, but I do know how you can create more jobs, grow your economy here in Derry, make your cities more affordable, and also make it a greener place to live. That I can tell you, and it's called saving and reusing historic buildings. So today I want to make that case to you. 2 years ago, I wrote a book called The Past and Future City, and how historic preservation is reviving America's communities. But really the trends that it discusses are unfolding around the world, and I hope that some of these ideas will be useful to you here in Derry. The first thing that I want to start with is talking about one of those major global trends, and that is to speak about the fact that people are living longer today. A baby born in the United Kingdom in 1840 had a life expectancy of 35, and 45 if they reach the age of 1 year old. Today, that baby is likely to live until he or she is 80. In fact, global life expectancy is now around 72 years old, and that's an increase of 6 years just since the year 2000. It's expected to be 85 by the year 2030. Now, much of this change is due to factors like lower child mortality rates around the world, better nutrition, and more cures for deadly diseases. But in general, people are also living longer and healthier lives. As they say in America, 30 is the new 20, 50 is the new 40, and so on. Now, why is that important to what we're discussing today? For one, older people want to be able to age in place and to live in communities that are vibrant and walkable. This increasingly means that cities with restaurants, arts and cultural activities, and suburbs where a car is not necessary for getting around are becoming increasingly attractive. And for another, more people are traveling well into their golden years. They're not just retiring, they're taking advantage of this health and vitality to see places around the world and to explore exciting new things and locations. Last year saw an international increase in tourism of 7%, the highest growth in 7 years, and those were already years of very strong growth. In Europe, the growth last year was 8%. And it's not just older people who are seeing these sites. All over the world, we're seeing an explosion in the millennial generation, the largest and most diverse generation in the world's history. More than 1 in 4 people in the world today, 27%, count among this demographic bubble. In the United States, the millennial generation will pass the baby boom generation as in our voting population next year. And while the numbers are slightly lower in the UK, Northern Ireland has the largest number of millennials, defined as people ages 25 to 34 in the UK outside of London. As such, you can imagine that there's been a lot of research undertaken into what millennials are interested in, and study after study has come to the same conclusion. Much more than the generation that preceded them, who really helped spur the suburban expansion of the earlier decades. Millennials are looking to live and work in mixed-use environments that are authentic and character-rich, and that don't necessarily require the use of a car. In other words, they want to live in and travel to distinctive cities. And in America, they've been voting with their feet. A 2014 study found that the number of college-educated 25 to 34-year-olds living within 3 miles of a city had surged by 40% since the year 2000. As one young engineer in the city of Baltimore said, people want a lot more authenticity in what they wear, in what they eat, and where they live. Or in the words of Ann Olson, who's one of our partners in the Buffalo Bayou Partnership in Houston, Texas, she said, young millennials don't come to cities necessarily for jobs anymore. They come for quality of life, the quality of life that older places provide. In 2014, the architectural firm Sasaki Associates conducted a survey to determine just what it is that residents loved about the cities that they lived in. And one of the most popular answers by far was historic cities and buildings. Nearly 2/3 of the residents said that they like to stop and admire historic buildings while walking around, far more than who said the same thing about modern buildings. And when asked how architects could best improve the city's character, the most popular answer by far was to renovate and reuse historic buildings. By contrast, fewer 1 in 5 felt that their city was too quaint. These findings align with other studies. In 2007, Gallup released a poll on urban life that found the greatest positive correlation between happiness and those people who believed that they lived in a beautiful place. And last year, we conducted a survey with our partners at American Express. It was a survey of millennials that found that nearly all of them, 97%, appreciate the value of historic preservation. 4 out of 5, or 80% of them, said that they would rather spend money at businesses that support efforts that preserve and protect historic buildings. And millennials are twice as likely to prefer visiting historic downtowns and places with historic appeal over newer places. Which brings me to a third global trend defining communities all over the world today. Along with people living longer and the influx of millennials, we now live, of course, in the age of the information economy. Today, with the internet and global markets, professionals can work everywhere. And so to attract millennial workers, more and more companies are setting up shop in places with distinctive character. A half-century ago, suburban office parks were all the rage, but today, companies like McDonald's, General Electric, and Ford Motor Company are moving back into cities, often in historic properties. And this is especially true of new economy companies. In the United States, Google has moved into Howard Hughes' old airplane hangar in Los Angeles and into the Port Authority building in New York City. Companies like Twitter, Spotify, and Dolby are headquartered in the historic mid-market neighborhood of San Francisco. And of course, closer to where we are today, Dublin has become a European hub in recent years, with companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon investing in and building around the Silicon Docks, often by adapting and reusing historic buildings. So in short, more and more workers want to live and work and play in cities around the world that are distinctive and full of character, and companies are moving to meet them there. So when you take these trends together, longer lives, rising millennials, the new economy, fluid workers and markets, an embrace of history and authenticity, preservation and the reuse of a city's unique historic assets becomes critically important. As my friend Ed McMahon, who's a scholar with the Urban Land Institute and chairman of our Main Streets program, says, place is more important than a spot on the map. Place is what makes your hometown different from my hometown. In the old economy, markets mattered. In the new economy, place matters most. So in a world where capital is footloose, if you can't differentiate your city from any other place, you'll have no competitive advantage. And the same is true of a project or a community or a building. So for all of those reasons and more, Derry's nearly 400-year-old walls and the history in it and around them are some of your key economic assets. And you have such a rich history here. It's not for nothing that you were named the first UK city of culture. This was the last walled city built in Europe and the first planned city of the island of Ireland, and it's a vital trading port, an Atlantic hub in World War II. Of course, this is where so much of the troubles unfolded. And all of this history, even the complicated and difficult chapters, are not just important to reflect upon. They help bring visitors here and investment. They're what make Derry, Derry. And today, that's what makes your community unique and will really help you thrive. I've talked a lot already about tourism and economic growth today, but I really want to be clear. The benefits of reinvestment and reuse in your historic buildings aren't just about enticing outsiders. In many ways, they're what make Derry a thriving community in the very first place. One of the founding thinkers of the modern preservation movement is a woman you may have heard of. Her name is Jane Jacobs. She was a journalist in New York City with no formal background or training in urban planning, but she was a keen observer of the world around her. In 1961, she wrote, "Cities need old buildings so badly, it's impossible for vigorous streets and districts to grow without them." By this, she meant that old buildings provide character, and they help ensure mixed use. They offer space for entrepreneurs and local businesses. They help keep neighborhoods affordable for families from all walks of life, so that the streets buzzed at all times of the day with the energy of people. Jane Jacobs called this rhythm of the city the sidewalk ballet, which is a phrase that I just love. And she believed that it was the key to a thriving city. In short, she believed that cities were created by and for people. Now, this may seem intuitive to us today, but when she wrote those words in 1961, Jane Jacobs was both ahead of and out of step with the time. She quickly made enemies with many urban planning leaders in America who thought that as a journalist and a woman, that she really should just stay in her lane. The Goliath to her David was a master builder in the United States called Robert Moses. Over his career in the United States, he built more than 600 miles of highways, 13 bridges, and 2 tunnels all over the state of New York. Moses believed, in his words, that cities were built by and for traffic. He often ripped out entire neighborhoods to achieve his vision. And for a decade, these 2 intellectual titans battled it out in New York. It got heated and it got very personal. When Robert Moses wanted to tear down the very block where Jane Jacobs lived in Greenwich Village and run an expressway through lower Manhattan that would have destroyed much of the Lower East Side of the city, she helped lead a community coalition to stop him. Now, Jane Jacobs didn't win every battle, but she won more than she lost, and over the years, she helped to turn the tide against the so-called urban renewal projects that devastated so many of our American cities. And she helped to create an intellectual foundation for the preservation movement in America. A half-century later, we now know for a fact that older buildings are critical to the success of our cities. When Jane Jacobs made that claim a half a century ago, she didn't have computers or the massive amounts of publicly available data on cities that we have today. And now that we have those tools, we at the Trust decided to put her theories to the test. In 2016, we published the Atlas of ReUrbanism, which is a report that evaluated the age, diversity, and size of all the buildings, not just the historic buildings, but every building in 50 cities across the United States. We use GIS mapping technology and big data, as well as some really innovative data sources like the number of Instagram posts, to examine how each city block in these 50 cities performed against different environmental, social, cultural, and economic metrics. And what we found was exactly what Jane Jacobs intuited: that neighborhoods with a mix of older and newer buildings tend to have more small business jobs. They have more diversity in housing costs, meaning greater affordability for families across the economic spectrum. In fact, older and historic areas have on average 27% more housing units, which is so important in many of our cities. These areas also have hidden density, meaning that they have more people and businesses per commercial square foot than areas with just new buildings. They're more walkable, and they have more creative jobs. And they also have more small businesses. And they're more active on evenings and weekends. This is a map of cell phone activity. Remember, I talked about those Instagram posts. On a Friday night in Seattle, Washington. And the area in the orange and red there shows the intensity of people using their cell phones in the historic International District on that Friday night. So we're very excited about what we're seeing and our ability today to improve empirically that preservation is the path to a richer urban future. But as you here in lovely Derry already know, this case for preservation has really been right there in front of our eyes. But the attitudes can be quite different in the United States. And I want to tell you a story about a city that I know quite well. This is Denver, Colorado. I grew up in Loveland, Colorado, which is about 70 miles north of Denver. So this was my first big city. Today, Denver's a national leader in almost every way that matters. It has a growing population, an incredibly low unemployment rate, and some of the healthiest residents in all of the United States. So how did Denver become such an urban powerhouse today? And one of the big reasons is another fearless and very courageous and visionary woman named Dana Crawford. So while Jane Jacobs was battling Robert Moses back in New York in the 1960s, Dana Crawford was giving Denver a head start in reviving that city through preservation. She began her work in a part of town called Larimer Square, which was at the time pretty down in the heels. As with so many other urban renewal projects in the 1960s and 70s in the United States, Denver was planning to revitalize its downtown by tearing it down. And I'd like you to keep your eyes on this office tower here between the two arrows on the screen. So already, nearly 30 blocks of the historic downtown had been destroyed. Better living through parking lots. I think Robert Moses would have been very proud of what Denver was doing at the time. But Larimer Square, which is in the upper right-hand corner, was one of the few places that survived the wrecking ball, and that's because Dana had a very different vision of what it could become. Together with her friends, she bought up most of the buildings on this city block, sometimes just for a little bit more than the cost of the land that they were built on. It wasn't an easy lift, but she was right, and by the 1980s, this part of Denver came roaring back. Today, Lodo, as it's now known, is considered the heart of the city with some of the lowest vacancy rates around, and it's really refueling preservation-minded regeneration all over the city of Denver. But this isn't just a big city story. We're seeing the same dynamic play out. Historic assets seeding economic generation and revival in towns of all shapes and sizes through the work of our subsidiary organization, the National Main Street Center. In cities big and small, the best preservation projects are creating opportunities for community residents of all income levels while retaining that local history that ties generations together. So by now you may be thinking this all sounds great, but how do we make all of this happen? At the National Trust, we've been working on formulating a comprehensive toolkit of policies that cities can use to more easily revive their historic buildings. And I think many of these may apply here in your work in Derry. Last year, we released our comprehensive Partnership for Building Reuse. This was a report and study that we put together with our friends at the Urban Land Institute, and it's called Untapped Potential: Strategies for Revitalization and Reuse. You can access it on our website, which is savingplaces.org. And it suggests policy tools that communities of all sizes can use, such as form-based zoning and smarter parking requirements that make it easier to reemploy older buildings. It also includes a model adaptive reuse ordinance that can be tailored for the needs of different cities. Now, I know that there are others here at the conference who can speak better to what exactly will help here in Derry, but let me give you some of just our top-line findings. First, we want to encourage property owners everywhere to maintain the unique and distinctive features of their historic buildings. This authentic character has really become a market asset. Second, zoning and building regulations in many cases need to be modernized and made more flexible to make it easier to reuse historic buildings. In America, you can get a demolition permit generally with one visit to City Hall, and it takes months and visits to 2 different planning boards in order to reuse a historic building. Third is the issue of cars, and I know that traffic, especially inside the city walls, is something that is on your minds and on your agenda today. In the United States, there are 3.5 parking spaces for every car, and all those parking places often amount to dead space in our urban core. And with millennials forsaking car ownership at really historic proportion, we don't feel that we need the same level of parking requirements as we've needed in previous periods. And instead, we really want to encourage pedestrian-friendly, character-rich streetscapes that can make it easier to get around, make it more inviting, bringing more people downtown. Which brings me to number 4, and that's encouraging street life at all times of the day. It's Jane Jacobs' Sidewalk Ballet. Lively streets are vibrant streets that attract more walkers, residents, and tourists. The city of Philadelphia passed an ordinance that made it easier, for example, for restaurants and cafes to have outdoor seating. As a result, between 2001 and last year, they saw the amount of outside seating increase by 439%. And there have been similar experiences to create more expansive pedestrian use in other cities. In a town called Bartow, Florida, for example, volunteers reached out to local artists and encouraged them to create a new work of art, to take a picture of it with an app that they created on their mobile phone. The 15 best submissions were printed out and installed on vacant buildings and became an impromptu art installation that brought both foot traffic to the downtown area and renewed interest in the buildings. So that spirit of community ingenuity is really captured well in this video that I want to show you today about Covington, Kentucky, which was one of the winners of last year's Great American Main Street Award. Take a listen.
I recall memories of parades in downtown. It was packed with people. You would be shocked how rapidly our downtown declined.
From a young age, we had a lot of issues around poverty and crime. There were names like Scovington that were used. You weren't proud to be from Covington. The good news is I think that's really, really changed. We had a reputation issue, and so starting to embrace who we are and celebrate it was one of those first things where Main Street could really, really help with that.
It's helped shape our board so that we could find people that had talents and interests in specific areas based on the 4 points.
So it doesn't have to be I'm passionate about Main Street, but I'm passionate about bikes, I'm passionate about art, I'm passionate about architecture, and putting them in a room, and that's where kind of the magic happens.
When people come together and organize, innovate, and experiment, just as you all are doing here, they really can remake their community for the better. In Bogota, Colombia, for example, Mayor Enrique Peñalosa tried banning private cars on public streets for a day just to see what would happen. And the people loved it so much, they now do it every Sunday. In Dallas, Texas, they have a Build a Better Block weekend, where people spend 48 hours working to improve one single block by adding art, green space, crosswalks, bike lanes, and the such. Whether it's hosting a farmer's market, an art installation, a children's fair, a Pokemon Go hunt, or an impromptu dance party, they aren't afraid to try new things. You have such a remarkable asset here with the Dairy Walls, and I've been inspired by some of the other walled cities that I've had the chance to visit, and some that I haven't. Avila, Spain, Dubrovnik, Croatia, Cartagena, Colombia, where the walls have hosted pop-up bars, restaurants, open-air concerts, theater, and cinema. Cartagena also now features a special walking tour for those interested in exploring their past as a former center of the global slave trade. They're leaning into their difficult history, illuminating it and reckoning with it as a way of encouraging others to explore their distinctive history. So ultimately, these old places that we all love so much shouldn't be trapped in amber or sequestered behind velvet roads. They should be and can be 21st centuries of American and global community. These places don't just connect us to our past. They're the cornerstone of a brighter future. And I hope I've made the case to you today that I think that our lives and our communities are brighter and richer when they remain. Thank you very much.